This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity Podcast, the Becker Business Minute Podcast. Thrilled today to get to visit with Maxwell Nee. Maxwell has developed, spent time in, works on wine and whiskey alternative investments. And from my perspective, more of a wine drinker than a whiskey drinker, not an expert in either one of those. But Maxwell's going to talk to us today about those as alternative investments, what he sees, how he got into this, and a lot more. Maxwell, can you take a moment and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do with wine and whiskey?
Yes, thank you so much, Scott. So I really appreciate being here. So I'm the managing partner for Oeno Wine and Whiskey. Our core business is in London. And basically what we do is we help investors, collectors, drinkers to find and buy undervalued and overlooked hidden gems in the wine and whiskey market, hold them for long enough until supply is scarce, and then basically sell them back into the market at a premium, picking up the uplift and also the appreciation in the assets aging as well.
Thank you. And how do you look at finding scarce wines that have value enough that they're of interest, or scarce whiskeys? What does this look like? I mean, I know people have made a fortune in these other sort of areas that I would never have thought of, buying scarce Nike Jordan shoes and stuff. But how do you do this in wine and whiskey? What does that look like? I know there's serious collectors in wine and whiskey, like there's serious collectors in art, but how does that look? How do you go about that?
Yeah, well, 70-80% of the uplift that our clients get basically comes just from the aging, like the age-old saying, age is like fine wine. I'll tell you a quick story. So I was in a bar in Chicago once, and the bartender asked me, what would you like to drink? I love to drink an old fashioned, which is usually made with bourbon, but, I'm obviously a little bit fancy. I'm trying to be fancy. And so I select, I told him I want to drink it with scotch, and he's like, okay, great. Macallan 12 and Macallan 18. So for everyone listening, the difference between Macallan 12 and 18 is literally no difference in the liquid itself. The only difference is that it's been sitting in a warehouse aging for an additional 6 years, right? So the same manufacturing production process, just that it's a little bit older. Now, the difference between the price of these two drinks was the Macallan 18, which is 18 years old, was $125. The Macallan 12 was $25. So that's a 5x return in 6 years for the end consumer that an investor could ride that appreciation wave if they were able to get their hands on the young stock at the right time. So that's the main ethos, yeah.
And when you drink a Manhattan, and again, this is an unfair question, but can you tell the difference in the taste? Because it's diluted with some other stuff. Can you tell the difference in the taste between the 12 and the 18? Because the 18 is a lot more valuable. This goes to often certain kinds of mixed drinks. How can you tell the difference and the taste of the difference? I mean, I'm talking about something different than the value and the economics of it. But how do you feel? Can you tell the difference between the 18 and the 12 in a Manhattan?
Yeah, so in wine, you got to have a bit of a palate to taste the difference. In my opinion, my palate isn't that sharp. But in whiskey, 100%. Whiskey, even 3 years of aging, the difference between the 12 and the 15, a normal person could taste it. It smells different. It tastes different on the tongue. It's a little bit sweeter. It's less sharp. It's more approachable. Everything that makes it more refined, and that also contributes to it being highly desired and then therefore more scarce.
Thank you. And how much money do people invest in wine or whiskey? I assume it's not if the core part of my portfolio is S&P 500s and Treasury bills. I take it this is not the core of somebody's portfolio, but a smaller percentage of it. How bullish are people in this? How much do people invest in the wine and whiskey sort of portion of their portfolio? Is this a couple percent? Is this more of a hobby type thing? How do you look at this, Max?
Yeah, so it's usually about 5 to 10%, So there was a report from Barclays Wealth Management and Ledbury Research that said that at least 28% of high net worth individuals have their own private wine collection. So they're all investors. You're looking at more or less 1 in 3. With whiskey, it's probably definitely more than 1 in 3. In terms of how much money people put in, I know clients that have $2, $3, $4, $5 million wine collections, and I also know clients who Their net worth is probably less than $1 million, and they've still got $50,000, $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 in wine and whiskey. So it definitely is making its way as a competitive alternative investment asset class. Just to share with you some numbers, for example, the fine wine was, depending on which ones you look at, but more or less it was all up double digits, at least about 12, 14, 15% last year, all the while, the S&P took a dip, as well as, most markets around the world. So there is definitely merit in two factors: the fact that it's alternative, it's non-correlated to the broader market, and also its ability to generate double-digit returns.
And are people buying this like an individual bond, an individual stock, an individual bottle, a case, what have you, or are they buying it through funds? How do people approach buying wine and whiskey as a part of their investment portfolio?
Yeah, great question. So we have two options for investors in our company, Oeno Wine and Whiskey Investment. We have a Delaware fund where the minimum investment is $1 million. And then we also have a private portfolio option where, the minimum investment is $10,000, where someone could buy their own bottles and whiskey bottles and whiskey barrels, and we hold them, store it, and manage and exit for them. The most often question we get is, if I decide that I don't want to exit it, I don't need the money, can I drink it instead? And the answer is, always, of course. So it is a passion investment for a lot of people. That's why a lot of people like to have their own stock under their own control. But for those interested in, capital preservation, inflation beating yields, alpha generating arbitrage, that's what we've created the fund investment vehicle for.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And how hard is it to ultimately exit these investments after you invest in them? What does exit look like?
Yeah, great question. So exit is not easy. Exit's the hardest thing to actually take your money in and out of this type of investment. For example, a lot of wine and whiskey investment firms, what they do is they basically go to auction with your stock. And the thing about auction is that auction is essentially a fire sale. So no one goes to auction, ready to pay a premium. You usually go to auction to get a good deal. So you're looking at usually a 5-10% discount based on the market value of your asset. Plus, then the auction house takes about a 25% premium for selling your asset to their network. Now, what we've done is we've created the world's first vertically integrated wine and whiskey investment firm where we sell direct to consumer. So we actually have a fine wine bar in London, a rare whiskey bar in London. Both of them also sell e-commerce as well. And we have an exchange opening up very shortly this year as well.
Amazing. And then another question along those lines, when you talk about sort of like wine, whiskey, the connoisseur of wine or whiskey, different levels of sophistication or similar. So can I tell my friends that are whiskey drinkers that they're really lowbrow compared to me who's a wine drinker, or is it pretty similar profiles when you look at the wine and whiskey collectors?
It's all over the shop. We have clients who they've put their life savings into it, and because they just love it. They love the passion aspect. They love the asset. Real estate doesn't excite them. Stocks doesn't excite them. Not traditional investments don't excite them, but this does excite them. So what I would say is, our biggest concentration of clientele is actually our competitors. And what I mean by that is, for example, our biggest concentration of clientele is other bankers, other finance professionals, other people who are selling other types of investment products, quite a lot of lawyers as well, private equity, fund managers, hedge fund managers, alternative asset fund managers. They're actually our biggest investors in wine and whiskey because, they take away the fact that it's alcohol and they look at it for its merits of some of the things that I've mentioned. And, they're all very excited to put their own personal money in, which is really great.
Well, it's also a little bit of fun too, especially if you're not gambling 70% of your portfolio on this. It's kind of interesting to be a wine and whiskey investor. There's only so many times you could look at Apple and Microsoft or Amazon and all these things, and obviously a lot of those names should be part of your core portfolio. But this is kind of fun to be in wine or whiskey. Some people are in art and those kinds of things. If they even have more money, they're in sports teams, but we only aspire to those types of things. But so interesting. Maxwell Nee, where can people learn more about you and what you're doing?
Yes, so I'll share my details. So my name is Maxwell Nee. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I'm on there pretty much every day. And if you want to learn a bit more about me and what we do and take a look at my profile, things like that, Oeno, wine and whiskey fund.com is where you can find me.
Thank you very, very much. Again, Maxwell Nee, brilliant wine and whiskey investor. What could be better? Thank you for joining us in the Becker Private Equity Podcast, the Becker Business Minute Podcast. Thank you very much.